includes these four components that you're talking about. There's the engine, there's turbo boosts, lubricants, and then fuel. And the engine is the most important part because that's what drives your business. And it turns out there's essentially four engines you can choose from as a company. And these engines are self-sustaining loops that keep your business growing. And there's kind of like a fuel that goes into it, and then the output is growth.
Lenny, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to finally be here.
Yeah, man. We've been speaking over Twitter and I've been following your stuff for a little bit of time. But just to paint a picture, you've become one of the top Substack writers in the world. And today, when I looked in the business category specifically, you were right at the top. I know they've got like investing and finance and stuff. So it depends what you count as business. But either way, you're really on top of your game there. And before that, you spent a bunch of time at Airbnb and other companies. So the focus of today's conversation is really going to be around a growth framework that you've talked and written about before, but not talked about in a conversation like this. So excited to dive deep with you today.
Let's do it. Let's talk growth.
But before we get into that section, could you just paint a picture from your side, like a little bit about your background and how you landed in the newsletter world?
Yeah. So I started off as an engineer, started my career as an engineer. I got a job right out of college in San Diego at a startup as their first engineer. And kind of moved up the ranks there, ended up leading the engineering team eventually. I stayed there for 9 years, which is a long time. But the company kept evolving and kept giving me new opportunities. So it was an interesting journey. And I'm happy I did it. And eventually decided I wanted to start my own company. And did that in Montreal. So I was born in Russia, grew up in LA. But while I was in Montreal, I was hanging out with some friends and they kind of convinced me that I should start a company in Montreal. And so quit my job, moved from San Diego in December, straight into the winter of the Canadian winter. Started this company. This company called Localmind. We sat on top of Foursquare and Gowalla, if you remember those apps back when
I still use I'm one of the few people that still uses Foursquare. It's funny.
Amazing. Okay, great. So we were really excited about Foursquare and thought there would be a really cool ecosystem around their API, and built this app that allowed you to talk to people that are checked in anywhere in the world. So you could find out what's happening at the place you're thinking about going to before you actually go, which was very magical when it worked. And it was really fun and people loved it. But eventually we decided to sell the company to Airbnb, and that's how I joined Airbnb.
Yeah.
So that was a year and a half later. And joined Airbnb as an engineer, moved into product, became a product manager there. Worked on a lot of different stuff there, led the supply growth team for a few years, led the conversion team for a few years, helped launch the Superhost program, revamped the review system, built a host community platform, a bunch of other really cool stuff.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it was a great journey, and left that about 2 years ago and thought I was going to start a company again, but unexpectedly now make a living writing a newsletter.
Isn't it? How's that explaining that to your parents coming from your background? I saw you mention something today on Twitter that you'd just spoken at Stanford and Harvard and a bunch of prestigious places. Comparing that to like what you're doing in the newsletter world, do your parents get what you're doing?
Yeah, I called it my Make My Immigrant Mom Proud tour. My mom was very confused why I was leaving Airbnb and the very cushy salary and perks and things like that. And she was also very confused why I was writing a newsletter when I'd never in my life written anything. But now she gets it. Yeah, it's not a path I imagined going down, but it just kind of emerged from following things that I found gave me energy. I had this kind of philosophy of do things that give me more energy and do less of the things that sap my energy. That was kind of my like post Airbnb plan, and it led me to this weird life of writing.
That's incredible. Well, it's interesting. I didn't know that you hadn't really written much before, because it doesn't feel like that when you're reading your stuff. You've got really well organized thoughts.
Thanks, man.
Do you think that comes from your engineering product background? Because that world is very much like you have to kind of think in systems and frameworks almost.
I think it comes more from my PM mind of, I just want things to be very concrete and clear and to the point, and not beautifully written. Like I want to become a beautiful writer. And I know one of your past guests, Paulina, every time I read her newsletters, I just get these tingles of, wow, this is so good. It just makes me feel things. And I wish I could write like that, but I mostly focus on how do I write something people can use the next day in the office to make them more successful. And then I try to layer in making it a beautifully written piece.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Well, yeah, it's clearly resonating with people. And I've had, like we mentioned before, someone like Polina and Pomp, they're also really big on Substack. But yeah, you're really leading the way in this space, and people are really finding use from it. And even just someone like myself, I'm not a PM, but like even the frameworks and stuff you write about, it has been useful for me. So again, thanks for what you're writing, man.
Thanks, man.
So let's talk a little bit about the scale of the newsletter, whatever you're happy to share in terms of the size of subscribers and conversion to paid. What's that looking like nowadays?
So I launched it about 2 years ago. I started charging about a year ago. It's going to be a year actually in 5 days. And wow. I'm currently at about 55,000 free subscribers, about 5,000 paid subscribers. And I'm making essentially twice what I made at Airbnb now as a tech employee.
That's crazy.
Blows my mind.
And when you started the newsletter, did you have a plan for monetization from day one, or was it just
Absolutely
like,
not.
Let's see what? Really? Okay.
Yeah, I have very few plans into the future. I just kind of go with what feels like it's working. That's my current strategy. So initially I just started putting things out on Medium, and then smart people suggested I use Substack, even if it's just for the blog. And then that just kind of kept working, and it was fun. And I did that for 9 months just as like a experiment to see if I could do a weekly newsletter. And then what happened is COVID hit, and I was out of work for almost a year, and my Airbnb shares were not looking very healthy as COVID began. And so I was just kind of realizing I need to make an income again soon, because I was giving myself time to explore. And it just kind of led me to, let me see if I can charge for the newsletter and if people would pay for this thing. And it was pretty quickly feeling like it was going to work after I did that. And so I continued down that path.
It's actually, I wasn't really planning to ask you about this, but you just mentioned something that really resonated, which was that transition phase. And I've gone through this plenty of times, and I'm sure many people listening to this are also going through it in their own ways, especially with the last year we've all had. Like, what were some of the things that you were asking yourself to figure out that next step? Because I think one thing you mentioned there was the energy, which was like, what are the activities that give me energy and take away energy? And I do this like weekly. I look at my calendar, and all the way down to, this person is giving me energy or they're not. And sometimes
That's
they're
awesome.
friends.
I do that too. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's really a great thing. And in the feed, like in my Twitter feed or Instagram, I'm like, is this just annoying me and like getting me outraged? Is it news that I can just read in a daily recap, which is now what I do? I don't follow any news organizations on Twitter for that reason. And again, this is not for everyone, but that's really optimized my day. Like the whole day I feel pretty good, and then for 10 minutes I read about all the terrible things happening in the world and I can kind of isolate it almost. And I'm semi joking, but there's especially in the last year, while every day there was just crazy news, and there was no stopping it. So I kind of had to isolate that. So I'm curious, like, were there other things beyond the energy part that you were asking yourself to figure out what you wanted to do?
By the way, that's really good advice. I really love that. Just like taking that to every medium. Like, why follow people that are just pissing you off on Twitter? Like, what is the point? And I find the same thing with news. I'm just like, all they want to talk about is all this shit going wrong. And there's so much good stuff happening in the world, and you never hear about that. And so why am I even listening to this stuff? Yeah. So I did it similarly to you, like people that were giving me energy, spent more time with them, less time with folks that weren't. And then just in terms of work, so I kind of had these plans. I had like plan A, start a company. And so I had a track of work just exploring ideas. I had this spreadsheet of 50 ideas that I've kind of put together over the years while I was Airbnb that I was going to get to someday. And so I started working through those. And some ideas were fun and gave me a little bit of energy, but none of them just like pulled me in and I need to do this thing. And then as I was doing that, I started this writing thing. And there's actually a really important moment that I had when I was talking to a friend about this newsletter journey. And I was just like, man, I want to like start this company finally, but I keep having this writing thing on the side and it's sucking up all my time. And I need to find a way to like squash that so that I do this other thing that I think I want to do. And he's just like, okay, listen, this thing is going well. People like it. They find value in it. You seem to enjoy it. That's a rare thing to find. Maybe just double down on that thing and put this on the back burner for now and see where that goes. And that's what led me down this path.
Man, that's really resonating, man. So, and I feel the same with the podcast. Like I've been doing this, recording it since 2015, 2016, and it's been through different jobs and side project turned full-time thing. And even till today, like I've mentioned this a couple times in recent episodes, I recently had my editor take on a full-time job, and the last few weeks have been really stressful for me because, you know, to doing this once a week and editing at the level we do it is really tiring. And I actually spoke to Drew Riley. I think he mentioned you. I don't know if you know trends.vc. And he was saying that.
Drew, yeah, of course.
Yeah, Drew. And I think he said he had spoken to you and you two had spoken about like the content treadmill he talked about, like the feeling of, oh, I need to do this every week. Yeah. And recently I was feeling that a little bit because it was just all the 10 hours of editing. That is the part I normally outsource, and that's the part that doesn't give me energy. And I've been saying to myself, okay, I need to manage that. That can't take over my whole week. So yeah, I think that's really ringing true with me too, man. Let's touch on Airbnb quickly before we get on to the growth framework, because it's semi-related. You were there for 7 years, and you were there through a crazy hyper growth period. And we could talk for 2 hours just about your time there. But for the sake of time, could you just share a little bit about like what those early days were like? Because I think you were there when there were only 20, 30 product or engineering folks. So what was it like back then?
I guess a few things that come to mind. One is I think people look at companies like Airbnb and look back at what worked, and there's a sense that, oh, of course, they knew that was going to work, or oh, of course that was going to work. When really it's just there's so many things that didn't work, and there's so many so unclear if the whole business would ever work that only looking back does it feel like a natural success and something that like, of course, how could that not have worked? So that's just something I think people need to recognize when they look at companies like Airbnb. Is there's so many reasons it could have failed, and there's so many non-obvious things that worked and didn't work. And I think honestly, a part of it is just like the idea of Airbnb ended up just being an amazing idea. Once you get to a point where enough people know about it and a flywheel starts, it kind of gets to a point where you almost can make a lot of mistakes and it continues to work. And so I think we're going to talk about this, but a big reason Airbnb grew is just word of mouth. Once enough people started traveling in Airbnb, it started spreading really quickly through word of mouth because the experience was really unique. I like this word remarkable that I think of when I think of Airbnb and other word of mouth driven businesses is this word remarkable. Seth Godin talks about this. All that means is it's something that's worth remarking about, which essentially is a word of mouth thing. And so what I find with Airbnb, it's a remarkable experience. People want to talk about it. And so that was a big reason why it worked. I guess another point about Airbnb is it's a very, it's kind of a culture where it's never good enough and it's never going fast enough and big enough. There's always this feeling of how do we go bigger and faster and more ambitious. A story I think about is we were launching this one product called Neighborhoods, which was releasing all this information on all the different neighborhoods in the US so that when you're booking, you can tell what's this neighborhood going to be like. And it's like a week from launch, and there's a team that's been like sleeping in the office, shipping this thing, getting it ready. And there's a designer sitting there working on the homepage to like relaunch the homepage and pitch this neighborhoods product. And one of our co-founders, Joe, comes up to her and he's just like, she's asking, what should we do with this website? And he's just like, build something the internet has never seen before. And she's like a week from having to launch this. And she's like, all right. And that's kind of like the culture. Like Airbnb from the outside feels like a very warm and fuzzy, nice group, but internally it is, but it's also just like very pedal to the metal. How do we go faster, bigger, bolder? And that's just kind of an example of that.
What was the flip side to that is the being able to deal with that mentally and the stress levels, and when things don't go well, it can spiral. Did you feel that at times as well?
I never had a spiral moment, but I will say it was a lot of freaking work. It's a very hardworking, long hours culture, at least initially. And so you just have to get used to that. And I find, I think when you join a startup, I think that's kind of what you sign up for, and it's part of the deal. And I'm very happy I stuck with it and
yeah, it's worked out.
Stop. It worked out. Yeah. And I think that's normal, but yeah.
Awesome, man. So look, you've worked on so many different things. Again, we could do 10 episodes and have stuff to talk about. So today, for the sake of focus, we're going to start with this growth framework called the Racecar growth framework, which I thought was really incredible. So let's just kick it off, man. From what I could see from the outside, from reading your work, there's 4 components to this product growth, which is the first one was the growth engine. The second one is called turbo boosts. Third is lubricants, and the fourth is fuel. We're going to explain what all of those are in a second. But before we even go into the details, could you just share like a bit of context around who is this for and who is it not for? Like, you know, because
absolutely.
This isn't for every single company in the world, and you know, you've probably applied this in many different contexts. But yeah, curious what stands out to you there.
So maybe zooming out even further, I spent a lot of my time with this newsletter looking into growth stories and how growth strategies, and essentially understanding how all of the most successful companies grew. And I've spent a lot of time on the early days of how they got their first, say, 1,000 users. And then I've also spent a lot of time on the longer term, down the road strategy of how do they grow long term? What needs to work for a company to continue growing? And so now there's kind of these two ends of the spectrum that are coming into focus for me of how to get your early users and then how to long-term grow your business. So this Racecar framework is focused on the long term. How do you grow eventually and long term? And then we can even talk about how to get your first users. And then I'm slowly filling in these puzzle pieces through more and more of my research of how companies go from 0 to, say, 1 million. And it turns out it's not as mysterious as people think. There's not actually that many options. It's more of a question of which of the options do you choose, and then how do you become the best at that or do something remarkable within that option. So we could start at the end, and then we can come back to the beginning days. And so the end is this Racecar framework, and this is based on work that I did with a buddy of mine, Dan Hockemeyer. So this post is something we both put together. And what we found is there's a really cool mental model of thinking about how businesses grow long term. And it turns out you can think of your company like a race car, which includes these 4 components that you're talking about. There's the engine, there's turbo boosts, lubricants, and then fuel. And the engine is the most important part because that's what drives your business. And it turns out there's essentially 4 engines you can choose from as a company. And these engines are self-sustaining loops that keep your business growing. And there's kind of like a fuel that goes into it, and then the output is growth. So should we dive into those?
Yeah,
engines?
So I love that. So I'll repeat kind of what I heard and understood, and then you can clarify if I heard it wrong. So the growth engine is the most important part. Is self-sustaining. The turbo boosts, from what I understand, are more like these one-off events or big hero moments, maybe events, a Super Bowl ad, and they can maybe make a big splash, but they're not self-sustainable the way a growth engine is. And we'll go into the details of what that means. And then the lubricants are more about running efficiently.
Exactly. Things that make everything run better.
Exactly. And then the fuel is what's actually needed to make the car run. So the input that's needed. Got
Exactly.
it. That's awesome. So maybe, yeah, we can start off by going into the growth engine itself. So I've heard you talk about loops and engines, and I have a visual of this thing going around, and people talk about flywheels. I found like a lot of the jargon sometimes is like overly used, but in this case, I think it actually is really helpful to see it visually, because I think if you think of like a growth engine, in a traditional business, you think of a marketing funnel, which is not exactly the same thing. But a lot of the time when you're getting new users and getting them to convert and become paying users and then spread and share something, like in business school, you might learn it like a funnel. And I think what I like about this is it's not necessarily like a linear thing that just goes from top to bottom. It's more something that keeps feeding itself.
Exactly.
Is that accurate before we move on from that?
Yeah, that's exactly accurate. And there's this group called Reforge, who was one of the first, I guess, groups that kind of figured out that this is the thing that matters more than funnels. So they kind of had this famous blog post that loops are the new funnels. And in reality, they're both important. Like funnels are a part of these loops. And so they both are worth thinking about. But when you're starting out, it's a lot more important to think about the flywheel / engine / loop. They're all kind of the same idea. And it's just to your point, there are these things that kind of feed themselves and keep going.
Yeah. And so what we're going to do is we're going to be talking about a lot of theory, but what we're going to try to do is layer on examples wherever possible. So if we're talking about a funnel or a flywheel, is there one that we could just explain to people, like Airbnb's flywheel or a company that people know about?
Well, let me share the 4 engines first, and then we can talk about which
that sounds great.
Leverage each one. So essentially the way to think about this is if you think about like all the things you can do to grow your business, there's like PR, there's events, there's paid ads, there's SEO, there's this like whole collection of options. And what this concept tries to help you with is which ones should you focus on deeply and which are just kind of these one-off things or just micro optimizations. So the engines are there's only 4 ways your business is really going to grow long term. And the 4 ways are performance marketing. And the way that loop works is you spend money to run an ad, the ad drives customers, the customers generate revenue, and you can feed that into more ads. So that's a pretty straightforward one. The next is virality, which is what we all know and love when we think about viral growth. Essentially, users draw new users, and those users join and invite their friends, and their friends join, and it goes on and on. And I'll give examples. Maybe an example of that one is like, Snapchat or Telegram, WhatsApp, Facebook, things where you're kind of encouraged to invite your friends. And we can talk about like how to know which of these your business is most naturally suited for, because it's not like choose any. It's usually based on the type of product that you have, one is going to fit best. And there's actually this kind of growing meme of first-time founders focus on product and second-time founders focus on distribution. And a lot of that's actually very true, I find. And knowing these engines is how you think about that, is almost working backwards from, I have a unique way of being really good at one of these things. What product can I build to take advantage of that? That's a mental model that I find useful. So anyway, let me go through the 4 and then we can talk in more depth.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, performance marketing, virality, content is a 3rd one, and that includes SEO as one, usually the most popular one, but also includes like viral videos and content people share with each other. So an example of a company that grew primarily through content is like Glassdoor or Trulia or Quora and Reddit, where you just think of like looking for a thing and then it shows up in your Google results and then you go find it.
Yeah.
And then the 4th is just sales, where you hire a salesperson, they find customers generate revenue, you hire more salespeople. And that's usually the most common engine for enterprise businesses, B2B businesses.
Like a Salesforce, I think is probably a good example of.
Yeah, Salesforce is a classic example.
The king.
That's right.
Yes. All right. That's awesome. And I know that you've mentioned those are the four main ones in the blog post. You also mentioned that there's some others people think about, but like partnerships, physical space. So like physical space could be retail stores, like a showrooming thing that Casper done, for example, came to mind for me. Shelf placement.
Casper is a good example where they're almost exclusively performance marketing driven. And then they started expanding into other engines like retail, where like the loop of a physical location and physical placement is you pay money for a location, either on a shelf or on a block. People walk by, enough of those people buy stuff, generate revenue, and
Yeah.
keep the business going. Sometimes it's just like a brand building thing where it's not meant to make money, but that's, I think,
Directly.
more
Yeah.
rare. Yeah.
And then the other one was partnerships, which we'll just touch on briefly, because even though it's not part of those four components, I think increasingly we're seeing really interesting examples of this, even in the creator world, that both of us semi-playing. Well, you definitely playing, and I'm partially playing in.
No, you're definitely playing it.
Yeah, yeah, I'm definitely kind of in there nowadays. But yeah, so I think this is an interesting one as well, because a lot of people don't always think of this, and maybe it's not the primary way to start, but for some people it can be a huge growth driver. I mean, even at Google when I was there, and that's a really obviously huge established business, channel partners were a huge driver for us. Even on a smaller scale, affiliates for other companies I've worked with as well. And even on a smaller scale, if you're an independent creator, I would think about partnerships too, because the way I'd see it, like I did something with the Hustle newsletter, that wasn't like I didn't pay for anything, but we both, like I brought something to the table and they wanted to feature it. So there was a way for me to be featured in their newsletter where there's distribution. So I think it's probably worth mentioning those two as well. But for the sake of this conversation, we'll start with those four.
Yeah, an important wrinkle to think about when we talk about this stuff, the kind of the core idea of an engine is that it continues to grow your business. And sometimes partnerships do that, where they continue to draw traffic. Sometimes it's kind of like a one-off event, and doesn't mean you shouldn't do that. Like those other parts of the car are great. It's just they're not going to continue driving growth, and that's the core. Is you need to find a way that continues that growth. Otherwise, you're just going to flatten out again. And another really important point of this concept is it's not that you just pick one and you'll win. It's to actually do well, you have to become one of the best in the world at that engine in order to have a chance. And the way I think about it is you kind of find the cross section of your market and one of these engines, where you could be at a huge company if you're the best at, say, content for travel, and another business can be amazing at performance marketing for travel. So as an example, Airbnb's incredibly successful as a virality driven travel company, but Booking.com, very large, successful business, is also really big, but they've become really good at performance marketing. And then there's like TripAdvisor, which became really big through content. So the way to think about this is you just need to find a way to become the best at your market in one of these engines to have a really good chance. And the main issue companies have is they don't realize how they have to become incredibly good at one of these things. They kind of think they can just do all these things in some small way and have a chance. And it turns out that's really, really hard.
Let's just touch on performance marketing first. So, are there a few examples of companies? I know you just mentioned Booking.com as one. They were Google's biggest client for a long time. Spent over $1 billion a year. I think I'm allowed to say this. I think it's public. I guess they're a part of a public company. Now it is. Yeah, they spent over $1 billion in search ads alone, right? So crazy.
Everybody tweet this right now. This is breaking news.
I'm getting sued. No, I don't think it's a big secret. So when you think of performance marketing as an engine, there's obviously companies that start way too maybe they start too soon on the performance marketing side and they haven't actually got something to promote. But I'm curious, like if you were advising a company, and I know you do this through your investing, what is the right time to start when you're looking at your product in the company? When should you even explore this?
What's cool about performance marketing is that anybody can do it. Any sort of business can try it, and it's really easy to try. You could just kind of set up a Facebook account or an AdWords account and just run some ads, and it'll take you a couple of weeks to see how they go. So that's the easy part and the good news. The bad news is, in general, you should try to avoid building your business on performance marketing if you can, because it's so incredibly competitive. And if it's not yet, it will become competitive if you find something like a sliver of success there, because it's just kind of this arbitrage between you and everybody else that's trying to compete for the same words. So I think of a company like Wish, which is built almost exclusively on performance marketing, and they just They had this founder who's just like a next level brain kind of guy who worked at Google on their search ranking and just found ways to become incredibly good at performance marketing. And that's how they grew, from just kind of finding these really clever algorithms and ways of approaching it. So that's the level you have to rise to become great at this long term. I guess other companies are like Credit Karma did really well at performance marketing. Casper is a good example. Like all these D2C companies, they all start with performance marketing and then just becomes this very hard battle against all these other mattress companies now. So that's my main advice is ideally you try not to base your business on performance marketing, but when it works, and many companies succeed.
If you're bootstrapping or self-funded versus VC backed, I think, I don't know all the details of Casper's business, but I'm pretty sure they had a lot of runway to invest a lot because they were gaining market share. If this was Bilal's mattress company down the road in Brooklyn, probably couldn't afford to compete with them. So I think it also comes back to the unit economics and the formula of ROI essentially, and being able to play within those parameters. And I think what happens a lot of the time, like you said, it's really easy just to start. But as you get more sophisticated with it, you start to build up more of these parameters and can build a really successful machine if it works. And there's so many different things to optimize there. From your experience, what made those sort of companies really good at this? Was it just about hiring the best talent? Was it making sure the culture was numbers driven? I'm just curious if you've seen any commonalities there.
So let me share two kind of rules of thumb for knowing if you should be focused on performance marketing for your business, because most of the time companies aren't, and they're not going to find a lot of success in performance marketing. So I think one is it was a natural fit for performance marketing. And the two rules of thumb that Dan and I came to in this post is you need to be generating revenue from your users immediately so that you can feed that right back into the ads. And then two is your product is not something people are naturally looking for. You have to get in front of them. That's the magic of ads. You get in front of people that aren't looking for your thing. And that's where ads help, is like I always think of a Slinket. I was looking for a Slinket. So you have to go to them and be like, did you know there's a Slinket that will make you so much happier? And that's where ads help. So those are the rules of thumb I think about.
I love that.
And then beyond that, it's basically, I think what makes these companies successful is their natural fit. Two, they realize this is how they're going to have to grow their business mostly. So then they go really deep and big on these bets, and they hire a lot of really smart people that focus heavily on just ramping up their performance marketing team. So I think those are the attributes.
Yeah, that's really helpful actually, because again, like you can also use, one thing I'll add is that there's digital marketing is used by almost every brand in the world. Like you're right. Like a Nike uses it, Amazon uses it, and a small startup can use it. And in my opinion, the way you're describing it is really about when you're ramping up and growing at a hyper pace. Whereas if you're like a Fortune 500 brand that is trying to grow like 12% a year and grow to 15% a year, there's other types of marketing that you can do as well that isn't always just so performance driven. So it might be brand marketing as well.
Brand marketing for sure. And that actually is a good point that I should have mentioned, that performance marketing you can add anytime, and eventually everybody does it later. So the question isn't like, can you do it and will it be of any value? It's more, will it be the primary engine that grows your business initially? And usually one engine explains almost all your growth initially. And then eventually like every company layers on a second engine, maybe a third down the road. But it's important not to kind of distribute your energy too early, because again, you have to become really, really good at one to have any chance. And often people kind of spread their resources too thin. Like, oh, we'll do some SEO, we'll do some virality here, and that's kind of the premise of this piece, is that that's unlikely to work.
How do you know it's the right time to add a second engine? I guess the simple answer is when the first one's working, but the more detailed answer would be like, what qualifies as working, I guess? Are there like metrics or benchmarks that you usually look at?
I think the simple way to think about it, like, if I could tell you a clear answer, that'd be Harvard business class
Yeah.
that would be worth a lot of money. I think the simple answer is you want to anticipate the S. So there's this concept called the S curve in growth, where you start on something like, say, a performance marketing engine, and it starts to ramp up and grow, and then eventually it slows, plateaus. And as a business, what you want to do is anticipate that plateau and build a second layer. I think Jeff Jordan talks about it, like you want to build a layer cake of growth, where something new starts to sit on top and continues overall growth at the same pace to extend it. And like, yeah, because if you layer on these growth curves, the growth looks very steady overall, but in reality, there's like a new thing that's growing the business. So the simple answer is you want to anticipate this plateau approaching at some near future and start to plant seeds for another engine.
So the next one is on virality, which I think, again, this was mentioned on all of the best examples, because I think virality, obviously, as we're defining it in terms of growth engine, is, you know, a prerequisite almost for a lot of these. But it also is probably a popular one because it shows that people liked the product enough to spread and share that with other people.
Yeah, what's interesting about virality / word of mouth is it's becoming increasingly important to startups to have that element, because all these other channels are getting more crowded. SEO is becoming harder, paid is getting harder, sales is always hard. And so that means it puts more pressure on these free kind of organic growth channels to have any chance of success. And at the bottom of it is this just like a remarkable product, a product worth remarking about? Or there's like a whole group of social apps where it just only works with friends, where it's kind of not going to work otherwise. And so that automatically leads to some virality. And then the question is just how much. But yeah, if you look at like most businesses and you look at that list, I think partly because I focused on consumer businesses, which are more naturally suited to virality, it's a part of a lot of really successful companies for sure.
So let's maybe paint a picture with a few examples. I think we touched on it earlier, but Airbnb, the viral nature of Airbnb, was that really around me telling my parents, hey, I'm booking an Airbnb for us? And they're like, what's Airbnb? Or is there other components that I'm not remembering? Like there's, I guess, a refer or invite a friend sort of stuff.
There's like a lot of types of virality, and I forget the full list, but there's like, I just tell somebody about it, which is the Airbnb example, where it's innately interesting and you want to tell people about it after you go on a trip. Then there's, I need to invite my friends to do this with me, like Snapchat. Then there's, people experience the product passively, like Dropbox. I share a link with my friend and they like, hey, what the hell is this? And then they sign up. And then there's incentivized invites, which you just talked about, which are referrals, which Dropbox also did really well.
And you get like a $10 reward for inviting someone to Wealthfront or Uber or whatever.
Exactly. And then there's more. I think another example is Airtable and Figma, where you are more productive doing this with other people. So you just like invite, like Slack. So it's less of like, it's less social, more of a work setting. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of types of virality.
Got it.
And so the question is your product naturally suited for that? Because whenever I talk to people about this thing, they're like, oh, okay, cool, I got to figure out virality. That's the best one. But it's really, you can't just lop it on, and it's hard to pull off. And it has to be a natural fit for the kind of product you're building for it to work.
Yeah, I think my favorite one is when you go in a room with a bunch of marketing folks and they're like, we need to make something go viral. And it's and you know, that's not just a product, that's like a campaign maybe, but
which is a great example of a turbo boost, which we'll get to. But those are great and you should do them. But yeah, they go and they come and go, and then they're gone, and then you're back to where you were.
Yeah. So we talked about some consumer viral loops there that you just mentioned. I think the B2B SaaS example you gave there with Slack, Figma, Coda, Airtable, these sort of brands, that's kind of more like a bottoms up approach, right? Like someone who is just a regular worker finds one of these products, starts using it, and then they invite someone to their dock, and and then they're like, oh, what's this thing? And then it kind of moves up. Is that accurate?
Yeah, exactly. What's cool about bottom up B2B businesses and why they're so hot right now is they have the magical combination of really cheap viral growth, just like a consumer app, with the contract sizes of enterprise businesses. So how could you not love that kind of business?
You're getting best of both worlds, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why they've become, if you look at like all the fastest growing tech companies and companies in general, they're all essentially bottom up B2B businesses for that reason.
So this is the last question I have on that is around, again, a qualifier or how you know you're going viral. And in this case, I think there is a little bit more of a way to measure this. I think there's something called a K factor, which is just a metric that's used. And I think if the K factor is more than 1, that means your product is viral. Is that right?
I think people try to use this metric. I find in practice, it's not actually that easy to use. And so what I actually found a lot more useful. So the simple answer is yes, that's how you technically measure it. And if you can, that's amazing.
Yeah.
A lot of companies can't because some of their invites happen offline and they have no idea who was invited and how many people are invited. So in practice, what I find useful is just look at the percentage of your new users who came in through a referral or a word of mouth. So you ask them in some way, how did you hear about what we're doing? And then you measure roughly what percentage of them came in through a friend or family or an invite. And that'll tell you if you're doing well around virality.
And is there like a range? And again, this is like saying how long is a piece of string, but from your experience, if you've got like, are there like rough benchmarks for, let's say, a SaaS company that if you've got 10% of them versus 50%, like is there a range that we could maybe point people towards?
I'd say definitely you want to see over half if you're like actually spreading through word of mouth, and then probably closer to like 70% means you're working through virality. Because otherwise, what's the rest going to be? Either performance marketing, sales, or content, and then that's a whole different game. That's not a core viral growth engine.
Completely, man. So I think we covered off on virality fairly well there. Is there anything else before we move on to the next one, which was around content?
So I think maybe just like what companies are well suited for virality. The rules of thumb that I find is it's a product that's better when your friends or colleagues are using it. So that's one. That's when you should think about, is this going to grow through virality? And then 2 is it's just innately fun to share, kind of like Airbnb. It's remarkable where people want to talk about it. Those are the rules of thumb I would use. Yeah,
another one that's coming to mind on the consumer side recently is Clubhouse, because they both had the virality, but they also had the you're in a line waiting to join. The FOMO, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting combination as well. Similar to the SaaS example you said, the bottoms up and enterprise. If you can create that on the other side, that's pretty cool combination too.
Yeah. If we have time to talk through the first early user stuff and the strategies there, FOMO is kind of an interesting one where it sits on top of other strategies. What I find works best to create this sense of FOMO that Clubhouse did really well is it needs to be a combination of there's like awesome people inside the club having a really good time sharing how awesome it is, and then that velvet rope that's keeping you from going inside. Because if all you have is that velvet rope, no one wants to get in, doesn't matter. So that's the key. And you need both. And the thing inside the club could either be awesome people like Naval and Mark Andreessen, who were there early on pontificating inside Clubhouse, or it could be just an amazing value prop like Robinhood had like free trades, or Dropbox value prop was like throw away your USB drive, it's going to change your life. And so that's
even
that's
Gmail,
what I find is important.
I think was a good example back in the day.
Unlimited storage.
You had to wait around for that, and you're like, oh god, you got a Gmail account? Like, which to younger people listening to this, you're like, what are you talking about? But that was definitely a great example.
Take a note on that. That's a great one.
So that's awesome on the viral side. So we've covered performance marketing, virality. The last 2 to mention are content and sales. So I think we can touch on these fairly quickly. But one of the things when I was reading this, when I think of content, I think of content marketing, which is a blog post a company wrote, or, you know, like I work with Coda. I think you know those guys too. And they create like these amazing templates, and that people go and see, oh, this is how Figma uses Coda. And that's a great piece of content. But what I didn't realize is there's also user content. There's UGC, user generated content. So Quora, you mentioned earlier, Glassdoor. So content isn't always just a company. It's also about how can you incentivize your users to do that as well.
Yeah, and that version of it is the best world scenario for your company, where the loop is your users generate content. Like an example is Quora. People find that content, find out about Quora while they're looking for something totally else, sign up, and then generate their own content. That just builds this amazing user-generated content loop. And I have this post where I spent a lot of time thinking about what are the different types of content-driven growth that you can do. And it turns out there's kind of this like 2x2, if you think about it. One end of the spectrum is user-generated versus editorially generated, where like the company generates the content. And a good example of that is maybe Ahrefs. If you know those guys, they write about SEO.
So yeah, they're a big SEO tool.
Yeah, so they write these amazing blog posts about how to do SEO well. So there's like user-generated versus like editorially generated. And then the y-axis is whether it's SEO specific content or versus viral content.
Yeah.
So this creates kind of a map of type of content businesses can create to drive growth. And then those are the kind of the four quadrants, like user-generated SEO optimized or editorially written SEO optimized. And there's like a whole post talking about this stuff. But there's actually a really interesting one that one of my friends kind of helped me uncover, which is in between the two, which I call data-driven SEO optimized, which the Coda example is one where I think it's an example one where it's not user generated and not editorially generated, but machine generated. For example, Thumbtack, I think, is a good example, where they have all this data on all the plumbers in the US. So then they generate thousands of pages of best plumber in Oklahoma, best plumber in Tallahassee, best plumber in Topeka. And so that's just automatically generated. And that's a really interesting way of approaching content in general.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm remembering this correctly, but did Canva do something? They did some crazy SEO strategy that went kind of viral as well, where they had all these sub pages.
Exactly. Canva and Coda, I think they're closer actually to Editorial, because I think somebody creates the templates and the categories, because it's probably a few hundred. But what's another, like Zapier? They're a really good example.
That's a good one.
Where they have like all these connections, and they did a cross section of all of the connections meets the other connection and created bazillions of pages.
That's a great point. Yeah, because anytime you search for how to connect Airtable with X service, like they've got a page that ranks for that. That's a good point.
Yeah. So if you can do that, that's a really magical way of driving SEO traffic. And the key is you need a bunch of unique data that nobody else has to generate all these pages to become like the place people go to find an answer to some.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about the editorial side. So I definitely get the UGC. If you can incentivize people to do that, or if it's naturally occurring, that's awesome. But a lot of companies still need to figure out their own content strategy, whether that is their owned properties or their rented channels like social media. In my experience working with brands, a lot of the time, there's unlimited things you can do. And one of the hardest things to do is choosing your focus. And from your experience working on this with other companies, how would you guide someone who's trying to figure that out for the first time to say, okay, you've only got, let's just say, less than 5 people working on this. What are the channels you're going to figure that you're going to focus on? What's the type of content that you're going to create? Is that something you've worked on previously?
Yeah. So the most important thing there is that you decide, am I optimizing for SEO or am I optimizing for viral sharing of this content? Because it's one or the other. And then if you're doing viral content, then it's like, how do I make something amazing that everyone wants to talk about, which works really well for some companies. Like Mr. Beast is a good example of that in a sense. He just creates these like one-off viral pieces of content, and that works great. And he just has to keep doing that. When Superhuman did this really well when they first came out, Rahul wrote these really popular blog posts, and it built a lot of traction initially. But normally you probably want to focus on SEO, because that's the loop that'll actually keep giving and keep driving traffic ongoing. So most companies that are good at this figure out, okay, we actually have to do this for SEO purposes. And what that means then is, what keywords do we want to be winning? And then what type of content is going to help us win those keywords? And that's the key, is to figure out, okay, we're doing SEO focused content. Great. How do we win at SEO through writing? And then it becomes a whole SEO strategy.
And what I like about your distinction there, which is, are we creating viral content or attempting to, or are we creating SEO content? Then you can create primary KPIs for each, right. And you don't get distracted, right? And that's right. Kind of like, even in my work with a lot of these sort of companies, they'll say, okay, we want to grow sales, drive awareness, get more loyalty, spread the message, whatever. And right. What happens very quickly is everyone knows those are positive outcomes from any piece of marketing you work on. But most of the time, good marketing can't do all of those things at once. A lot of the time, you need to really focus in on understand what part you're actually focused on in the first place. And then secondly, if it's one person working on this at home, you kind of know what's going on. But as soon as you add a second or 100th team member, you really need to focus in on primary and secondary KPIs is how I do it. So when I do it, is only one KPI is a success. That's what we're optimizing for. And then we have the secondary KPIs, which are the context. Okay, cool. So this campaign is all about driving shares, and that's what we're primarily focused on. If it also drove signups and it drove XYZ, then great. But and I think a lot of people don't do that. So I think it's definitely worth mentioning, man.
You're tingling my PM brain there with focus and goals and priorities. I love it.
I'll throw some OKRs in there. We'll get going, man.
That's right.
So yeah, that's awesome on the content side. The last one is on sales. Maybe this is a little bit quicker. But yeah, from your experience, again, like, what's the criteria for the sort of company that this is most applicable for? Because I think that's how you qualified the other ones.
Yeah. So it turns out sales and performance marketing are kind of similar in the heuristics of when you should go that channel. The main difference is with a sales driven business, you just have to have high average order value and high LTV. Basically, every sale has to be worth a lot more than a performance marketing business. And then usually it's businesses that need handholding and a little bit of education and onboarding. Those two kind of attributes tell you it's probably going to have to be a sales driven business, which is great. Most companies, like if you think about every bottom-up business actually, where it starts off being self-serve, they all add sales teams later, 100% of them.
Yeah.
So the question for enterprise B2B businesses isn't like, should we do sales? It's, when do we do sales?
Just to close the loop on sales side, I think, again, a lot of people can gain from sales, and a lot of product-focused companies that are like product people at heart often ignore or kind of deprioritize sales and performance marketing as well sometimes, because in traditional, if you go back 10 years ago, I think the culture of Silicon Valley anyway was build it and they will come, and create something so remarkable that the whole world just sees it. And yeah, of course, that's still a prerequisite if something's going to be a huge success. But a lot of the time, especially in 2021, you do need to think about these channels, because in the past, you could just post on Facebook 10 years ago and it would spread a lot more than it does today, because the organic reach was...
And there's just so much content out there, and so many companies and so much noise out there that, like, even if you do get someone's attention, the fact that, like, whether they stay with it or continue remembering who the hell you are, it's just getting harder and harder. So yeah, completely. So especially for enterprise businesses, sales ends up being very important. And to your point, a lot of founders resist it for a long time because they kind of want to build a business that's a lot more efficient, doesn't need a whole sales team, but it turns out they all do eventually. And a classic example is Dropbox versus Box, where Dropbox waited way too long to start hiring and scaling a sales team and thinking about enterprise sales, versus Box went to that very quickly. And I think they're worth more now, even though
that's crazy.
Dropbox was killing it.
They had a head start, I think. So just to summarize, we covered performance marketing, virality, content, sales. Those are the 4 types of growth engines. The next part of this process was around turbo boosts, and contrasting to the growth engines, which are self-sustainable, going around in a circle, which we love, of course. Turbo boosts are these big hero moments, or something that gives a bit of a splash. So we touched on it briefly, but are there examples that we could maybe share with people how they've used this tactic?
Yeah. So the other three things, just to kind of give an overview, turbo boosts are just like one-off things that give you a big boost in growth. Like you're racing a race car, just afterburner it for a little bit to get ahead of the other car, and then it ends, and then you're shit. There I am again. So there are things like PR, like a TechCrunch story is a classic example. You get a big boost and then it goes away. An event, you run a conference or some kind of meetup or something like that, has some impact and then just disappears. It doesn't continue driving growth. Brand marketing, I think of this in a sense where and brand is interesting because it almost fits both as a turbo boost where you get like the one Super Bowl ad, drives a bunch of business and then disappears. But it's also a lubricant in that lubricants are just things that make the engine run better, like conversion improvements, activation improvements, retention makes everything just run more efficiently. And I think also just a strong brand also does that because people trust you a lot more. So it fits in both those categories. So
they kind of work together almost at times. Yeah, I'll give one example from my experience too. When I was at Charity Water, I was working on the brand partnerships team, and we would invite 150 brands, and we would do a big event, and that would be like getting all these brands together and kind of showing off the brand, but also making it super useful for them. And that would essentially increase our conversion rate with those brands, right? Because we would be having all these one-on-one conversations over months. You bring them all together, and there's this big energy boost. And then the next few months, you end up closing a lot more of these partnerships that you've been working on forever. So I think there's definitely room for it. And in a traditional business, like a SaaS business does this as well. Like you invite a bunch of people, and there is, I think it's very trendy to say like we're all going to work from a farm and never see each other again because of what's happened last year. But I think that's also obviously an extreme point of view. I think there's still a huge bonus to being able to see people in person, especially for sales, because just once you've created that relationship, then you can go back to the farm and like do things remotely.
I agreed. I'm very excited to see people again. Feels like it's coming soon. Hopefully it all works out. And just to finish that thread, the reason that it's important to have a distinction between these engines and say lubricants is a lot of times companies want to just optimize their like sign up flow or optimize a thing that's going to make things a little bit more efficient versus what's the thing that's going to drive growth over and over and over. So that's just one quick thought. The other is retention is actually a really important metric, and it almost feels too trivial in this framework where it's kind of a lubricant when really it's the most important metric to watch when you're building a business because it's the ultimate measure of if you have product market fit, because it tells you people are sticking around and they value what you're offering. So it's really, really important that you focus a lot on retention, even though it doesn't fit in one of these engine frameworks, just to make that clear.
Yeah. And just to clarify, so that was part of the lubricants that we talked about, which is you mentioned conversion, activation. Before we go into retention in a bit more detail, could we just talk a little bit about conversion? Because when I read conversion, I think of conversion on a web page, right? Like 100 people came to site, 5 of them signed up. And there's landing page optimization and paid speed and all that sort of stuff that you can improve, and those are incremental changes. But what I also saw, something I missed originally when I read this, was conversion could also be just customers signing up and the conversion of someone spreading and then that user converting as well. So was there anything else on conversion that we wanted to share that I might have missed?
Yeah, conversion is anything that just increases somebody converting. So it could include sign up, but it could also include sending an invite to a friend and that friend signing up. So all these things just make the engine, again, they're lubricants, they make the engine run more efficiently. So they help virality, they help your sales, they help content, all that stuff. And they're all really important. Like it's really important to do these things and to improve conversion. The mistake founders often make those putting too much effort into optimizing this thing versus like, we don't even know how to drive growth.
That growth engine.
The growth engine, exactly.
They haven't got that core part done.
Exactly. And you don't want to just spend all your time micro-optimizing something that isn't going to really continue to keep things going.
Yeah. And then similarly on activation, when I heard activation, I thought about free users becoming paid users, and maybe that was with my SaaS hat on. But when I read what you actually wrote, it wasn't actually necessarily that. It was more about customers using your product for its core purpose. I really like that definition. Could you just elaborate a little bit more on that as well?
Yeah. So if you think about a product you're building, let's say Slack, what what's the moment where somebody understands what the hell it is and feels the value of your product? So there's like the value you provide, and then there's a person understanding and seeing that value. Activation is getting someone to that point where they understand what the hell this is and feel like, oh, okay, I want this thing. And so it turns out that's a really important input to retention, because if people don't actually feel that value, they're not going to stick around. They don't really get what the hell you're doing. So that's one of the bigger levers that you can pull to increase retention and just make things grow faster. And that's what's called activation, because they're called an activated user, which is kind of a growth term, where they like, oh, okay, I see, I get it. Like at Airbnb, for example, the activation moment for hosts was getting their first booking, where they're like, oh, wow, I get it. I'm making money. This is great.
Got it. It's like that moment. That makes a lot of sense. I think another parallel I'd draw here is you mentioned Rahul and Superhuman earlier. He was also on the show, and we talked about how they essentially said no to certain types of users, and they would do these very detailed surveys to understand, are they using Superhuman for our core value proposition, which was speed and getting through your inbox in half the time or whatever it was. And I think that's a really great point, because sometimes you can spend forever trying to figure out, how do I activate all of these users into people who love my brand and company? And sometimes it's really about, you're not focused enough, and you need to find the users who really like your stuff. And even from a creator's point of view, your newsletter or my podcast, I made a huge shift with the podcast when I realized I shouldn't be making this for my parents to like my show, right? As much as I want them to watch, and they still do, but like they're not my primary audience, right? And that means if I'm thinking about them in the back of my head, I'm thinking, oh, I need to define this phrase, or let me tell this fun story. But really, who likes my show are people who are creating businesses, who want to create businesses, and we're getting into the nuts and bolts of things that you're not necessarily getting elsewhere. Have you felt that yourself with your newsletter?
Well, let me answer the first part, but that's really good. This is a really important point. And it turns out one of the biggest ways to improve retention is to change the users you're offering it to, because for that very reason, they're just not the right audience, and they're not going to stick around, and everything's going to look terrible. So really important. That's a really important point. Figure out who the right audience is to offer your product to. And that actually feeds into the early user work that we'll talk about, to figure out who that, I think April Dunford calls them, the customers who care. Who are the customers who care about what the hell you're building, and make sure you have a sense of who they are. And so, with my newsletter, honestly, I get all these, unsubscribes. Every day you get an email of someone unsubscribing, and I used to be sad about it. But then I just realized, like, I love that someone tried it. It just wasn't right for them. Oh, well, it happens. Totally cool.
Yeah.
And similarly, when I see kind of traffic coming from like Hacker News versus Twitter versus other places, there's such a clear difference in conversion to paid, partly because they're not the customers who care. They're just like, just kind of poking around here and there.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah. So one of the best ways to increase retention is to change your targeting, for sure. And paid ads are actually one of the worst ways. Like usually the more paid ads you run, the lower all the other metrics end up being, because they're the lowest intent and least interested in what you're doing, because you have to come to them. So there's a lot there.
Especially comparing it to, you invited me as a user, and you're personally vouching for it. On the paid ad side, you're going pretty much after brand new audiences most of the time. And the only thing I will say, I think comparing paid ads to anything else normally is a lot worse in terms of performance or retention. But at the same time, there is an ability for you to, once you've got to a certain size, go and find people that look like those audiences.
Right.
And then what I think a lot of people do wrong is they just expect that group from a cold, point of view, just to convert to that level of user. And what they really need is to hold their hand a little bit more and explain more beyond just the ad and the click through and the sign up. On retention, the last thing I wanted to talk about was what good user retention looks like. Are there rough like benchmarks you use?
So yeah, so where this came from is everyone always talks about retention being the most important thing to watch as a company is scaling, as an investor also, but no one really had a consistent benchmark of what the hell is good. So what I did is I surveyed about 20 of the smartest growth people I knew, both investors and growth leaders, and just kind of triangulated across all of their perspectives what is good retention and what is great retention for every type of business. And if you might have it on the screen right now, or if you just Google what is good retention, you'll find it. And I reference it all the time when I talk to startups about investing or just helping them out. And there's a lot of thresholds there that you're hopefully seeing on the screen.
Yeah, and I'll share a couple just to share the context, because a lot of these things, it goes from 25% to 90%, and the context is you kind of used the fire emoji and the okay emoji. So consumer social, you said 25% retention is okay, 45% is really good, and consumer subscription 40 and 70%, all the way up to enterprise SaaS 70% is okay, 90% is really good. I'm just curious, this might be a stupid question, but why is there such a huge difference, do you think, between consumer social and enterprise SaaS on this side?
It actually comes back to the engine, that your engine has to work. And one of the big inputs is how much is it costing you to acquire each of these users, which translates to how many can you lose for it to work. And so with sales, it costs a lot of money to bring on a new customer. And if only 25% stick around, you're losing a ton of money. Versus like a Snapchat, their new users are very cheap. And so you can afford to lose a lot more. So those numbers roughly come from what did we expect it's going to cost these companies to acquire users, and how many need to stick around for this engine to keep running profitably. So
the last thing, just to wrap this all up on the post, is really around the pitfalls, because I think we've done a great job of a comprehensive description of all of them. But you mentioned a bunch of common pitfalls, so maybe we'll just pick a few, and maybe you can share what you mean by this. So the first one you mentioned was focusing on growth engines when you actually need turbo boosts. I think that was interesting, because earlier you had said kind of the other way around, where someone didn't necessarily have that growth engine, but they were like doing something like a big splashy thing. Are there examples you've seen of the other way around, where they're focusing on growth engine when they actually need a turbo boost?
Yeah, this actually will be a good segue to the second portion of this chat, which early on, most of your work should be these boosts, which kind of ignite the engine a little bit, like reaching out to strangers to get them to try your thing, or doing some PR to get any attention. So early on, you shouldn't be just like building the most amazing performance marketing engine from day one, or like designing all the viral loops immediately. A lot of it is just get it going, and that's turbo boost, and that's why it's important to think of it that way.
I think in traditional startup world, there's a phrase of do things that don't scale at this stage.
Exactly.
So that I think really ties in, and again, bringing this back to the creator economy and stuff that we've worked in, when you're getting your first 100 subscribers to your newsletter, like that is all you're doing, right? You're doing hand-to-hand combat, emailing people, texting friends, asking them, calling them up. So I think that's a really great thing. So maybe we'll go into that in a little bit more detail in a second.
We can. My newsletter went through that journey exactly, so it'll be an interesting example. But yeah, that's exactly.
Well, right. Since we're there, actually, why don't we just talk about it? So yeah, why don't you share what was that initial period like for you, getting your first 100 or 1,000 subscribers?
So kind of like starting with the engine, all my 99% of my newsletter growth is word of mouth. People just forwarding it to each other, tweeting about it, things like that. So that ended up being the engine. And I feel like that's true for every newsletter. Anytime I've personally tried to run ads, like I experimented with Twitter ads, Facebook ads, I had a referral program just to see what happens there. I did some like B2B, like gets companies to offer it to their employees at a discount. None of that did anything. All of it ends up being word of mouth. And not to say none of that was worth trying and maybe someday it'll work, but it just continues to show me anything else I do other than just write amazing, valuable content for people. Nothing else matters. That's all that's going to help this thing grow. So the engine is very much Virality. Early on, though, the things that I had to do to get it started is the stuff we'll talk about, which is just like reach out to specific people who I think might be interested, post it in places where there's an audience for this thing, like Twitter. I did some guest posts, so I call it infiltrate an online community and help them see this awesome thing you're doing. And then I did, and then like influencers helped me in a sense, like Andrew Chen and a few folks like that retweeted some early articles, and that helped that kind of world turbo boost that get things going. And that's roughly what led to my first 1,000 customers. It was a couple guest posts, a few retweets, and then Twitter. That was essentially it.
Well, actually, I think this is probably worth the transition because I think we covered off on the other stuff really well. So thanks for sharing that. So that was a great example with the newsletter, but just taking a step back, you talked about like the things that you need to do early on. You're saying it as a newsletter person. What about for a company? Like what are examples of what people have done in your experience?
So I'm finding there's kind of like these 3 steps to get your early users. And the third step is actually going to go find them. But there's these 2 other earlier steps that are important. The first is figuring out your customers who care. We talked about this earlier. So thinking about who should I be offering this to, who are actually going to find this interesting and useful. And you almost think about them as your early adopters or your kind of like wedge into a broader market. So some examples, I have a doc here that I'll pull up just to kind of remind myself. So examples of companies and their customers who care. TikTok focused on bottom tier influencers who are doing a pretty good job on Instagram, and they pitched them, hey, you could do a lot better on TikTok. Cameo focused on C-list celebrities. Netflix focused on DVD fanatics, just like people that love DVDs online. WhatsApp focused on Russian immigrants in San Jose. That was the early users. Substack focused on writers who were already doing well online and offered them, hey, here's a better way to do this thing with ours. Tinder focused on just like, I don't know, attractive party loving college students in LA. That was their customers who care. So that's step 1 is just like, who are these people that are going to really want what you're building? And often you have no idea and it takes time to figure out and you figure it out later, but it's worth that exercise to think about, how do I just like narrowly define who will most want what I'm offering? Yeah, so that's like the broad, and there's like so much detail to go into how to actually do this that marketing people are very good at, but that's just like the broad idea.
But find the people who care. Like that's the. So could we talk a little bit about? I think we've talked about companies quite a lot, but in the newsletter world or creator world that we both operate in, one thing that a lot of people struggle with is when you're starting from zero. There's all the do things that don't scale stuff, but while you're doing that, again, those people might not necessarily be the right people if you're just broadly going out to all the people you know. Because again, my podcast as an example, 90% of people I know probably aren't the right target for me. And over time, I've found new people who really like this sort of stuff. And a big thing with podcasts, when I started, it was literally just convincing people there's a thing called a podcast that you can enjoy, right? Which now everyone kind of gets. And even 5 years ago wasn't as prominent. So I think that's one part. And I found that just trying to convert those people was such an uphill struggle to be like, oh, there's this thing, just install. It's already installed on your iPhone. Oh, you're on Android. Oh, okay. What app should you use? And it's just like, I skipped all of that by just going on other people's podcasts who like similar stuff to me. Everyone who listens to another podcast already knows how to listen to a podcast. And it's a one click away from subscribing to me. But the point I wanted to bring up was about finding people who care. What if you don't necessarily know what that is yet, And like, how do you figure that out?
So I will give the opposite advice for creators. I actually find that it's much more important that you focus on the things that make you happy and you're excited about creating and researching and diving into, because you're kind of creating this job for yourself. And if you don't enjoy the job in the end, what the hell have you done to yourself? Yeah. Why have you gotten on this treadmill where you have to keep doing this work you don't like? So the way I approached it wasn't like, who will love what I'm doing? I'm just like, this is interesting to me. I'm going to have an excuse to spend time researching how companies grow and how product management orgs run and how to become a great PM. And And if it proved to be, if it's interesting to me, I find that there's other people that are going to find it interesting, and that proved to be true. I don't know if it always turns out that way, but I think that's really important as a creator, to just focus on things that are really interesting and you're curious about yourself.
That's great advice, man. Yeah, that really hit me. Just because that I'm just trying to think from my point of view, but also the people I've interviewed who are doing really well in this space. Like you mentioned Polina earlier, Pomp, Drew, all these people.
Even like Ben Thompson, who does like every day. And like, how could you not? How could you do that if you aren't just like, I really, really love learning about this stuff and writing about it?
And because that's a great point. There's a distinction between creators where the work you're doing is part craft and part creative, as well as, you need to learn the business side if you're not used to doing that sort of stuff. But when you're starting a company, you could argue you should love what you're doing there too, but there's so many different parts to that that you end up hiring people and you're doing other stuff. Whereas when you're kind of individual or like a small team of people creating essentially art in a way, right? Or like, some form of art anyway, that's a great point, man. I never really thought of it like that.
And what's interesting is it connects to general startup advice, is work on things that are solving your own problem. And I think that's basically the same idea in the creator world, but it's even more that, like, the startup advice is more because you're more likely to find something people will buy and use. But I think in this creator world, it's like, I just don't want to spend my time doing something that I'm not excited about. Why would I do that? Yeah. And a lot of people fall victim to, I'm just going to create content I think people will love. And then they're just like stuck on this content treadmill, creating these videos or posts about like things they don't really care about. And it's just like, and it's never going to be as good. And that's what's interesting too, is like, it'll be much better if you're excited about it. It'll come across, you'll go deeper, you'll uncover things that other people wouldn't.
That's a great, one point of nuance I'd add is that just being honest with myself and people I've also spoken to, a lot of us, including myself, say focus on the inputs, not the outputs. I can create a newsletter a week or a podcast a week, and I'm going to focus on enjoying that, which I definitely agree with. But naturally, all of us, I speak for myself and most of the people I've interviewed in this space, we still look at the numbers and we still look at, the click-through rates and did people watch all the way through. And naturally, especially people like you and I who are numbers driven, I'm sure in a way, like, of course, that's data that helps inform what people liked, but the other stuff is harder to quantify because it's a feeling, right? Like, did I enjoy that conversation with Lenny today?
Exactly.
Did I get energy from it? And maybe there's practices, maybe I could write a few notes after and remind myself what I felt like at the time, but it's not like a million people watched this or they didn't, you know what I mean?
And the way I think about that is like, am I excited to like write this next post? Am I like pulled into it? It's just like, oh, I'm kind of excited to learn this thing, versus like, oh shit, I got to do another post this week. Oh god. And I think you raise a good point. Like, it's not just follow your passion and do something that you love and that everything's going to work out. You also have to, there's like the Venn diagram of do things you love, but also create value for other people. Because if you're not creating value for other people, like no one's going to care about what you're doing. So that's something I focus on a lot, is just what value is this going to be to other people concretely? Is this going to be something they can go do something with? So that's the rough Venn diagram that I look for myself.
Do you think, if I could ask quite an honest question, if you hadn't had the growth you've had, and you had 1,000 people on your subscriber list, do you feel like you would still be doing what you're doing now?
That's a really good question. Like 2 years in, would I be writing a weekly email that nobody reads? Maybe, but I definitely wouldn't be putting this much time into it.
Yeah.
But I may still find it valuable just to kind of crystallize my thinking, but much lower chance. So I think that just like, again, it's not like all that matters is following your passion and assuming amazing things will happen. It's also thinking about, is this going to be valuable for people? And that's, I think, partly the reason it's been successful, is I always, every time I'm about to publish something, I read it again. I'm just like, is this going to actually like help somebody with their work? Or is this just a bunch of high level pontificating on things that are just going to fade away immediately?
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, I think Polina told me that she reads the work and says, is this for my ego? And that takes out a lot of stuff. And then I forgot the other one. Was it just, does this add value or not?
Yeah.
Maybe there was a third question. I've tweeted about it. I'll share it with you after. But
like
that was really great because I think she's one of the best at like editing. She just takes out everything that's not useful or fun. But that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, just because a lot of people want to sound smart and nobody cares. They're just like, help me get better at this thing.
Completely.
But I think it's important to note, like, not everything needs to be help me at my job. There's a lot of, I think of these kind of 5 jobs to be done for content. It's either make me better at my job. One is just entertain me. Like, it's totally fine to listen to amazing podcasts that make me have a good time. Like, that's also valuable. Like, a lot of newsletters are just interesting and fun and people pay for them, like The Browser, where it's just beautiful writing every day for $5 a month. And then, so you can either help people do better at their job, make them, entertain them, make them money, like Pomp. He just helps people invest better in a sense, plus entertains them. And then there's also, you could just help people feel like they're part of something. Like there's some like climate change newsletters where I just feel like I'm supporting a cause and I feel really good about it. So there's a lot of ways to provide value, and those are a few of them. Yeah,
that's a great way to put it. I love that, man. Let's go into the newsletter part a little bit more. So you talked about the first 100 or 1,000 people. One of the problems with paid newsletters specifically is that a lot of your best content is behind a paywall, or a huge percentage of it is behind a paywall. Therefore, the SEO benefits you get from a blog aren't necessarily there. So you really are dependent on people sharing that with people, right? So how do you think about discoverability as someone who's creating a newsletter? Because maybe there's people that go on the browse part of Substack and see you at the top.
No. Nobody does that. No.
Yeah, I'm curious, like, have you seen any interesting examples of this apart from what you mentioned already?
So it comes back to what I talked about. Anything I've ever tried doesn't work other than just writing high quality, valuable content, because that leads to people talking about it and sharing it. So SEO is a very small part of the work so far. Paid ads doesn't matter. Referrals didn't do anything. Even like cross promoting with other newsletters didn't do much. Like, it's these little blips that are like, cool, this is awesome. But it all comes down to just writing consistently good, valuable stuff. So that's what I always come back to. Yeah. And just the more time I put into the content, the better everything goes. And actually, as a side note, I just taught this course on product management.
Yeah.
It was a 3-week period with a bunch of prep before that. And I just didn't have as much time for the posts during that period. And my growth very clearly slowed down during that period. And it, again, just reminds me of just like the content is directly correlated with growth and retention and just how much people want it. So that's crazy, in the end, it's all it comes back to. Yeah.
And you can tell the energy that you're putting into something when you get distracted. And it's not necessarily, it's completely understandable. You were busy for that period of time, but it's almost kind of like, I mean, it comes back to that engine. Like, a part of the engine is you in that case, and your energy. You're the input, right. Not the capital or the stuff. And in this case, it's like, am I, one, available? 2, am I energized? And sometimes a part of that is like being burnt out, which I think a lot of us feel. In full transparency, I was feeling that in the last few weeks, given this editor situation. I literally was editing it myself, and man, it just kills me every time, because I actually don't mind the process of editing. It's actually quite fun for me. It just takes way too long, and it just, there's stuff that goes wrong, and then you're like banging your head against the wall because I'm not a professional, so it's just one of those things where in the short run sometimes you have to do that.
There's a real downside to this creator kind of life, including burnout and no health insurance, like difficult to get health insurance. And no like 401k. And no like time off. Like we have to deliver a thing every week or every day, which blows my mind, without any, like, people are paying every month, and people are paying, like, for me at least, annual plans for the next year. So one, I can't ever stop unless I plan a year ahead or refund everybody. And then 2, every week you got to deliver some awesome. So it's there's real downsides, but all things considered, it's pretty great.
Can I ask an honest question again? Like, from what you're doing right now to the time you had at, say, Airbnb and the company you had and sold, like, how do you compare what you're doing now to those? Like, how do you feel about your life right now versus your previous roles?
It's the best possible life I can
Really?
imagine, honestly. It's pretty
That's amazing.
incredible. Yeah, like it's very low stress. I don't have to deal with corporate bullshit and performance reviews and uh, all that stuff. I loved it and it was amazing, and I'm very happy I uh, did that for a long time. But this is a pretty great path if you can make it work.
You can make it
And
work.
I would not trade it
I'm
for
so happy
anything
to hear
else.
that, man. Yeah, you kind of just lit up as you said that, so that was is cool to hear.
Yeah,
So we'll touch on a couple more things on this before we wrap up. But so we talked about discoverability. So it sounds like you just focus on creating great work. Another thing that's coming to mind, I had a Tim Urban on, if you know him from Wait But Why,
absolutely.
and
Well, I pay him on Patreon every month
oh, amazing! All right, yeah, he's one of the best.
for his book. Whenever his book will come out, I'm excited.
Oh, yeah. Well, and one of the things that stuck with me, I added it to kind of my year plan, which was he talked about the 4 types of content, like A, B, C, D content. And this was just a tweet, but I can't actually remember of every single part. But essentially what he's saying is there's certain types of content which is just okay. The next one is maybe like, oh, it's actually pretty good. And then the third one is like, oh, this is really good. But the only type of content that really spreads is the 4th type, which is this was so good, I need to tell someone about it. Like, it represents me almost. And I can think to the Patreon, there's like 5 or 6 different Patreons I pay for, or 10 plus newsletters I pay for. I'll say the Patreon one first because I don't actually know any of those people personally. And I think that is a distinction too. Like, there's a comedian that I pay for. There's an Arsenal football one that I pay for. And those are people, I just listen to their stuff every week. That one I wanted to support. But more importantly, I wanted the extra content and I was happy to pay. Whereas I'll say someone like, I mean, a lot of the newsletters I pay for, it's a combination of this is really great and I want to get more of it. But also, like, I'm invested in that person and they don't necessarily need my money, but I want to support like more people like them in the world. So my $5, $10, $20 a month or whatever it is, if I can help them help other people and I gain from it too, it's kind of like a win-win.
Yeah.
Have you felt that yourself, like from the people that are subscribed to you? Because there's a difference between those two motivations.
Yeah, I wish I knew what percentage were subscribing just to support. I think I'm at a point now where nobody will feel the need to support me, and I think they know I'm doing all right.
Yeah.
But I think initially there was a lot of just, I just want to support this kind of initiative, and I don't even know what you're going to write about, but let's just go for it. So yeah, I think that's really interesting, and I love doing that too. I subscribe to, I think, 70 newsletters.
Oh my God! Wow.
There's like a feature in Substack where you could see how many you're subscribed to, and it was kind of frightening. But it's just because
Did you say like, 70?
Yeah.
Oh,
not
wow.
paid, not all paid. I think maybe
Okay.
like 20 paid or something like that, but a lot for this exact reason. I just love supporting other people's work here. And there's actually a newsletter writer, Edith Z, I forget her last name, but she has a Substack where you can pay, but you don't get anything special. It's more just to support her. And she's making, I think, a reasonable income just from that. So it's like a Patreon model for Substack, which is kind of cool.
That is cool. I'm curious, just on Substack specifically, because it sounds like they've been pretty good to you and you've been good to them. And it's been probably, I don't know if you even speak to anyone from there, but they seem like a cool company that most people who use it seem to like them. But there has been a lot of discussion. I've seen people say once you get to a certain size, and probably you're at that stage now, where the fees that you pay out are a significant amount, and you could probably switch somewhere and save a decent amount of money. I'm curious, is that something you've thought about? And if so, why have you stuck with Substack versus going elsewhere?
Yeah, so I pay an obscene amount for Substack. The amount that I'm paying for an email platform and a blog is unreasonable. But I will say, coming back to my point about all that matters is the content. That's how this thing works and grows. What is magical about Substack is I don't have to worry about anything. And all I do is write, and everything else just works. And knowing that I can switch in the future if I wanted to gives me kind of the motivation of I'm just going to focus on the long-term growth of this thing. And even if I'm losing money right now that I could be making, I'd rather just do as good a job as possible on creating amazing content. And Substack lets me do that. So I'm happy there. And so that's the main reason. Also, they allowed me to live this life because never in my wildest dreams would I imagine this is where I'd end up. And only because Substack existed, where you just start for free, no downsides to just trying stuff out and then going down this path to paid. That's the only reason I ended up here. I'm just like grateful for them to have enabled this life, and I just want them to be successful. So I kind of have a bit of loyalty to them as well. Plus the team is awesome. And
yeah, that's fair. I think that's fair. And again, if you ever did change your mind in the future, that's understandable.
Yeah,
and
you can switch anytime. So that's what they know, that people can switch anytime, and so they have to kind of keep the fires under their butts. Value.
Yeah, completely. I'm curious, when you were starting up the Substack, how did you figure out what you were going to write about? Because I know you've got all this experience, and there's probably there's like the stuff you actually write about, and there's all this other stuff you know about that you could potentially be writing about. So yeah, I'm curious how you figured that out.
So I did the opposite of what people normally advise, which is pick a niche and become the best at that one thing, so people know you for that one thing. And if I was doing that, I would become just like the product management person, or just like the growth thing, or just like startup scaling stuff. And I found I just did not want to spend all my time thinking about just product management or just growth. And instead, I just thought about what am I just generally excited about that's close enough where I can write across these different domains. And so I just decided I'm going to write about product and growth and just whatever startup challenges people have starting their company. Against this classic advice. And part of the reason I did that, again, is I just want to be excited about what I'm working on and not spend my time on things that are like, oh my God, another product management post. Yeah. And so it was that kind of like Venn diagram of things that are close enough where I have enough breadth, but I'm also excited about them all.
I also like that you essentially write about stuff that people ask you about as well. So I saw the recent post. It seems like that was a question from a reader. And then you kind of went into more detail. They were like, someone mentioned this, I don't know what it is. And yeah, so that's a great way to actually provide direct value because people have asked you the question.
And also, so from the beginning, it was an advice column. I actually modeled it after Julie Zhu, who's this designer at Facebook who had an amazing newsletter for a long time and still is doing it, called Through the Looking Glass, I think, where she just, it was this kind of advice column for designers and product people. And so that's what I did. And actually the biggest benefit of that approach is I have endless topics to write about because I get all these questions from people and I just stick them in this queue that I have and I just go through them as
oh, that's smart.
Because otherwise, like, what am I going to write about this week? I don't know. But I have this like endless, like there's endless questions that founders have and PMs have. And I could always have something new to write about.
Yeah. And also if someone's asking a question, it's often that lots of other people are thinking that and they haven't articulated it. That's a great way to put it. So just to wrap things up, man, you've shared so much today, so I really appreciate it, both on the growth side and the newsletter side. There's a concept of audiences like a stem cell. I think it was Sean Puri who was on the podcast, and
where's this going?
Butcher. Yeah, and Jack Butcher, if you know him, Visualize Value guy, and I spoke about this. And what I think Sean meant by that is that, like a stem cell, it can evolve over time and basically become whatever you want it to become over time as you grow as a person and as the audience changes over time. So in his example, he has a podcast with Sam Parr from The Hustle. He got known from that. And then he's quite active on Twitter and he's been growing heavily on there. Then he did a newsletter, which was like a niche newsletter, but was quite expensive. But it was for very specifically like e-commerce people who were already past $1 million in revenue or something like that. And because of that, he was able to charge a lot more. So, and now he's raised a rolling fund. So I love the examples of people doing stuff like that, knowing it's not for everyone. I think Pump is also an incredible example of that, taking it from Twitter to email to podcasting to
he's got one of everything.
He's got everything. He's got a few brothers too. So
Joe, right? Oh my God, it's the whole family.
I think there's a few of them. Yeah, there's two, three more. Yeah.
Oh my God, wow.
But anyway, so the idea of the stem cell, which I thought was a really cool idea, And I think just looking at what you're doing, you've, again, already become known for a few things. And maybe you'll just keep focusing on that. But I'm curious, looking at slightly longer horizon, even if that's just the next couple of years, because it sounds like maybe you don't make 10-year plans or anything like that, which I don't either. Like, what does that potentially look like for you? What do you think? You're just going to keep doing what you're doing, or are there any other plans you've got?
My general plan is to keep things as simple as possible, because there's endless things I could do. There's just like, I'm kind of the anti-pomp, I find. I just want to do less things. I find like this one newsletter is like meaningful income for like an email a week. And why would I want to just keep adding more work to my plate if I don't really need to? And so I'm trying hard to do less things. Like I'm trying to not to write a book. I'm trying not to do a podcast, like all these things that feel like, oh, why am I not doing those things? Mostly just because it's awesome to just write a newsletter and make a living. And why would I want to break that? So that's my general plan. But I've been failing in that a bit because I had a PM course that I taught that sucked up a lot of time. And then
co-op with you?
Co-op, yeah. These things just kind of pull me in. And then I'm going to be launching a job board because I find that...
Cool.
Yeah, I find that they're just like aggregating a bunch of really interesting people. And so the thing that drives me to do more mostly is what other value can I offer this audience that I've kind of built around the newsletter. And I already have this job section in my newsletter. So what if I just build on that and make it even more useful? And then I have this community that's private for just the subscribers that's going super well. So a lot of my thinking just comes from what seems to be working and how do I do that better, versus like, what more can I do? How do I make this bigger? I'm trying to like not build an empire of any kind. I just want to do this newsletter well for a long time. And that's as far as I think.
I love that approach, man. But no, it's interesting because I think Pomp also did the job board and he's done some sort of cohort-based course. But I think it's great, man.
We chat about that stuff.
That's awesome. But listen, man, I think, first of all, thanks for all the amazing stuff you put out and for spending so much time today. We shared so much stuff that you haven't really shared as much on before, so I really appreciate that. And I just want to tell people where they should sign up for your stuff. It's lennysnewsletter.com and
easy.
And on Twitter, Lenny San. Is that how you pronounce it?
That's it. Yeah, Lenny San.
It's Lenny San, of course. Listen, was there anything else before we close out that you wanted to share, or any messages for people listening?
No, this was great. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. Thanks for spending so much time.
Thanks for having me, man.